Morning, everybody. Glad you're here today. I'm just setting up my screen. Hold on a second. Okay, sorry for the delay. Hi, Kathy. Uh, Good to see you today. Let's see here. Set that up. All right. That's better. Okay. I've been reading from uh, Jung's volume 15 of the collected works about spirit and art. And I found an um, interesting article about psychology and the artist. So basically, Jung assures me that uh, as a as an artist, I'm a conduit for the unconscious, whether I know it or not. I may not understand what I'm doing, but whatever. And I wanted to just see if the piece that I just took a picture of this morning um, has come over to this computer. Maybe not yet. Oh gosh. Now what's it done to me? Oh, there's the library. Okay. Yeah, actually it did. How about that? Um, so I'll share with you the status of my current piece, um, just for fun. Um, and this has taken me, it took me 4.5 hours yesterday and an hour and a half today to just paint the green. And it's not all the green, it's just to paint the, I guess it's the darker color of green, the color of green that's up around in the yellow and up in the upper left-hand corner. Uh, That's the green I was painting for 6 hours so far. And I haven't quite completed it. Um, but anyway, this piece is going to be called Seventh Heaven when complete. And just thought I'd share it with you for the moment. Okay, so here we go. Where am I? Where are you? That's the question. There you are. Second. All right. So, okay, today we're going to read this piece called Jung's Red Book as a Healing Symbol for Our Time. And I hope you enjoy it. It's by Maria Helena R. Mandacaró Guerra. And I suppose I ought to find her bio first. This is her bio. Maria Helena R. Mandacaró Guerra is a psychologist, graduated in 1976, Catholic University of Sao Paulo, with a specialization in Jungian psychotherapy. She graduated in 1980, Catholic University of Sao Paulo, PUCSP, with a master's degree in clinical psychology, and in 1988, Institute of Psychology, University of Sao Paulo, with a doctor's degree. She is a teacher of analytical psychology in Ceres Sapientiae Institute, Sao Paulo, since 1982, author of The Love Drama of C.G. Jung as revealed in his life and in his red book, Inner City Books 2015. She lives in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where she practices as a Jungian psychologist. And so her email, mhrmguerra@gmail.com. Okay, so we're going to read her essay today, which is in volume 4 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst. And this is volume 4, as I said. And I have this peculiar thing happening in the background, which is getting in my way on my screen, but there, I can move it. All right. If we could receive the spirit of our time in our practice, we would be seated in front of a patient who is suffering deeply. Chronically anxious, this patient lives at a frantic pace and has low tolerance when frustrated. This patient depends on the judgment of others and feels reassured when acknowledged on social media. Predominantly extroverted, some patients believe self-fulfillment is achieved through obtaining money, success, and status. Their exaggerated extroversion makes them try unsuccessfully to figure out their problems through consumption, whether of goods or medicines. Since relief is only temporary, the need for consumption emerges yet again and again in an attempt to desperately fulfill the void that alienates them. Sometimes the repetition compulsion manifests itself through an exaggerated and abusive consumption of alcohol, food, and illicit drugs. Sometimes they lose contact with their religious nature, or they live it through fanaticism, remaining almost always unconscious of the deep experience of God. Okay, this is going to be a profound one. Good morning, Richard. Good morning, Deborah. Their thinking and sensation functions are well developed, which means they have good technology skills. Nevertheless, they have difficulty thinking and sensation. The relationships are superficial, transitory, and more confined to the virtual sphere. Their ethics are questionable as they misuse technology to lie, omit, and spread fake news. Living under pressure, they feed their own existence. They feel their own existence is threatened. They are afraid of the future, and they begin to lose sight of the meaning of life. They are depressed. Even if they are open and receptive to change and accept differences and are concerned about the planet, their defensive insecurity leads them to regress and hold on to outdated and rigid principles, which seek to replace dialogue with force and respect for other with power and obedience. Geez, does this sound like anybody we know? Oh, goodness gracious. Since none of you have come online today in this on my side, I have to correct myself up sometimes. But let me do this. Let me pull up the link so that you can find me. And you're welcome. You're welcome to join me as I'm obviously falling apart. I I do have a lazy boy. I'm one of the lazy people. Uh, and I got out of my lazy boy at 4 o'clock this morning, and oh my God, I did straighten up my chair, but then I lost the wand to my chair and I cannot find it. Isn't that weird? I am hopeless. Um, let's see here. I'm just looking for this link. All right. Here's the link for today if you wish to join me. And all I have to do is put it on YouTube. Okay. My screen has a mind of its own today, so pardon me while I get control of it. All right. So this is the link. No, that's not the link. This is the link. Come on. Okay, try one more time. Here's the link, and you will also need the password, which I will provide anon. Okay, the password for today is okay. So I hope one of you will see fit to join me. Life used to be easier when I was younger. Um, sorry to be such a mess this morning. I'm in my 80th year, so I don't have any other excuse that I'm other than I'm old. So if you wish to join me, please do. I hope you will. And otherwise, I will just talk to myself. Okay. Imagining such a patient is a way to introduce some of the main problems that challenge us today, and in recognizing them, to present the Red Book, which we consider to be a healing symbol for our time, as a counterpoint. Obviously, advances achieved by humankind are undeniable communication possibilities, are undeniable communication possibilities with which favor and improve exchanges between people and cultures, the increase in longevity thanks to medical advances, the slow and steady development of collective consciousness, which is more open to gender diversity, and the need to consider living a more sustainable life rather than a life of consumerism. However, technological advances, which on the one hand enable us to be connected by the web wherever we are on the planet and bring many benefits, are also carriers of some aspects of the shadow. People's dependence on the virtual world is evident through their constant accessing of social media, posting photos, following personalities or even regular people, chatting or playing games. Connections between people are now lived to a large extent virtually. Relationships, friendships, and even sexuality find space in virtual life. One of the pernicious effects of the excess of virtual stimuli is an exaggerated appeal to extroversion. Okay, so beware of being too extroverted, I guess. Um, not a problem here, considering I'm in the something like 99th percentile of introversion. This defense of extroversion leads to superficiality, preventing one from delving deeper into oneself and into relationships, and makes it difficult to elaborate one's own subjectivity, which is evident in immature narcissistic desires, low tolerance of frustration, and lack of self-knowledge. Individuals tend to avoid deep subjectivity since entering the inner world means experiencing suffering from working through shadow contents. Sometimes contact with subjectivity occurs through the use of licit or illicit substances, which produce an alteration of consciousness and threaten users with addiction. This lack of depth makes it difficult, if not impossible, to connect with the purpose of life, resulting in empty and alienated lives, which in a system of feedback will feed and be fed by consumption. Boy, this is separate talk about my students. They are constantly on their phone, even though we don't allow phones. And they turn in a phone, but some of them have 3 phones, so they turn in one, and if they get caught using their cell phone, they turn in a second one, and they still have a phone. So they found all kinds of old phones that they can turn in. How about that? Okay, consuming also disguises itself as self-realization, making society believe that winners are those people with money, power, and status. In societies where consuming is considered to be a greater good, it is presented as shopping therapy or even as an affirmation of existence itself. I shop, therefore I am. The acquisition of things concealing experiences of frustration and pain, and even if ephemeral, giving the illusion of fulfilling the interior void. And whenever shopping is not enough, there is always the offer of antidepressants and anti-anxiolytics. These offer instant well-being without the necessary symbolic elaboration and involvement in intimate and significant experiences, which contributes to the wealth of the pharmaceutical industry. The appeal of consuming and the exaggerated unilaterality of extroversion alienate individuals, pushing them to normopathy, neuropathy, normopathy, which makes people feel good being just one more in the crowd, being like everyone else and thus receiving support of the mass. Receiving likes from the hundreds of virtual friends who may be unknown outside the web or having many followers comforts the superficial soul and provides the illusion of belonging to those who otherwise could suffer from isolation and feelings of abandonment. Instead of sharing experiences, they share a post, and when, for any reason, the other is no longer of interest, they can always be blocked or deleted. The connection is magically undone, exposing the frailty of the bond and transforming relationships or even people into consumer goods. These characteristics come with a sense of urgency that frequently impedes savoring and enjoying moments and experiences and may create anguish and anxiety. We are living in the era of speed. We have to walk fast, eat fast, move fast, and data connections must be faster and faster. And again, medicines appear as a way of quickly solve the unease. Together with depression, anxiety, and anguish are among the most frequent symptoms of our time. Okay. Does this sound like our time to you? I think so. Okay. I would like to stress that in our consumer society, with its emphasis on matter and consequent alienation from being, God is replaced by the market, which everybody should revere and submit to. But it is not enough to guide people who are searching for transcendence. On the contrary, it drives them toward nihilism, to a lack of purpose and depression, among other symptoms, which can only be overcome by the integration of opposites. The Red Book offers many contributions to our time. The simple fact that Jung plunged into his experiences and dedicated himself to them patiently and persistently is a healthy model for our times. Without a considerable amount of introversion, Jung would not Jung would not have created his Red Book. The Red Book is unique in that it was written by Jung from his personal experiences, having at its core his own individuation process. As such, it is different from every other book he wrote, even his Memories, Dreams, Reflections, for there he writes about past events, whereas the experience initially recorded in his diaries, the black books, are alive and registered as soon as they emerged. It is true that Jung dedicated 16 years to the transcripts of the Red Book, but this work came after the first description made while he observed and annotated the flow of his imagination. In this sense, Jung is like a midwife assisting and welcoming the newborn. Okay, what did happen with my... All right, I'm still here. Oh, okay, this is MP4, so this is not anything. Okay, so I don't know what just came up on the screen. I apologize for that. It was another video of me reading it, so I thought it was real, and it was not. Okay. Deborah says, I can't sign in to the Zoom meeting. Hmm. Okay. I do not know why. Um, and Richard says, I always leave my phone at home when I leave my residence, which isn't a lot, laugh out loud, but it's more of a nuisance to carry it about with me. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, all right. Deborah, I'm going to see if I can find the link again um, and see what I might have done wrong. Um, oh, maybe I gave you Wednesday's link. Let me give you Sunday's link. That might help. Okay. Okay. So this is Sunday's link, and wait for the password. Um, Sunday's password. See if that helps. Never mind. I'm sorry I'm old, but um, sometimes I have to crack myself up that way. Okay. Nice to have you all today. All right. Moving right along. Uh, I think we're all still here, I hope. If you're here, say, please raise your hand or say I'm here so that I recognize. Okay. 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 I think I haven't read this paragraph yet. The recording of his dreams and their associations and amplifications, the pictorial expressions and the detailed presentation of psychic contents through the technique of active imagination demonstrate the path used by Jung in his search for self knowledge and later proposed by him as a therapeutic resource. The importance given by Jung to experience, to what is beyond rational verbal expression and opens up to the metaphoric dimension of symbols, is invaluable. The Red Book also has another important characteristic. Although the material that originated from his internal world was naturally extremely personal, Jung recognized its collective dimension, which justified him using an almost prophetic language in it and creating in his Red Book with Gothic characters, paintings, and illuminations, as well as offering a variety of amplifications and theories. In fact, it would not be an exaggeration to consider that the germ of analytical psychology can be found in the Red Book. Well, that seems obvious to me. Um, yeah, let's see. Okay, Kathy says, why not make life easier on yourself and use the same password for all of your meetings? Uh, well, the main reason, Kathy, is that um, my various followers are used to using meetings using links and passwords from before, so I don't dare change them. And the artist in life is, yes, I am here. That's what I do for my Zoom classes and my book clubs. Uh, Keeps them the same, very wise. Okay, artist in life. I really have trouble quiet down myself. Definitely use social media as an escape mechanism. Advice, please, especially towards spiritual development. Thanks. Okay, here's my advice. Get a job as a school teacher and then get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and do art as long as you can in the morning and then go to school. And it's it's really working for me. It keeps me sane by doing the art, and it's it's what can I say? It's a contribution to society, and so anyway, uh, Kevin says, don't follow Skip's advice. Yeah, don't follow my advice. My problem is um, I have lived so many lives and everybody comments on it that I wouldn't know where to begin to connect you up with the way my mind works. I apologize for that. What I can do is offer what I do offer in the hope that you, as one of my followers, can catch on and it can gradually help you. Now, obviously, I do have a number of followers like Kathy and Richard and Deborah Curtis who come on here regularly, and I very much appreciate that. And I think they um, gain some benefit from what I'm doing, and so because I feel like they do gain benefit, I therefore feel impelled to continue to do it. I don't earn any money at it to speak of. Occasionally, and I'm talking about once every 2 months, YouTube will send me $100 or something. But it's in no way compensates for my time. I do this as a labor of love. And Kathy rightly says, find purpose, passion, and drop into your Zen zone. Meditation, sit down and breathe. And Deborah, okay, it won't let me in because it just says the meeting is scheduled for January 2027. I don't know what's going on. Never mind. Okay, well, wait a minute. That's something I need to correct in my uh, or maybe I shouldn't. I'm going to leave it as such. Deborah, I made a mistake, and my mistake was that I had these meetings going along for 52 weeks or 50 weeks, which is the maximum that Zoom allows. And then when I ran out of the 50 weeks, I didn't want to change the ID, so I've been fiddling with trying to extend it. And obviously, I made a mistake when I extended it. So I'm going to try one more time here. Um, what I'm going to do is see if I can get into my Zoom account. Well, that didn't work. But let me see if I can. Okay, it wouldn't let me do what I wanted to do. Oops. No, it won't let me do that either. So let me see. As long as I'm online here, I'm sunk. Um, okay. I am sorry. I obviously failed myself and everybody else when I tried to extend the date or the time and date of the session. And so I'm unable to extend it while I'm online. So rather than knock everybody offline, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to continue with the session. And with apologies. And let's see how long this essay is. It's a fairly long essay. I don't think we're, well, maybe it's another 12 pages, which suggests we won't get through it today. But it's obviously very detailed, and so it's worth listening to. Just go, hi, Art, good to see you today. And an artist in life. No, I do not run a Facebook group. My wife got off Facebook entirely in disgust, and I haven't chased Facebook in a couple of years. So, the best way to follow me is to be here on Sundays at 10 to 12 or on Wednesdays at the advanced reading group, um, which is 5 to 7 East Coast time. Or you can always contact me at this email address, which is my private email address. I share with all my followers, and in the expectation that you will not do anything untoward with it. And so, Art, I'm sorry to hear you're having a rough time. Yeah, so the times of my sessions are East Coast time, 10 to 12 a.m. Sundays and 5 to 7 p.m. Wednesdays. And if you're interested in the advanced reading group, you can write to me. Yeah, Eastern U.S. time. And so for Deborah, it's, I guess, 1 o'clock in the morning or something. I apologize to Deborah for the fact that God made the world black, round, and so she has to do this in the middle of the night. So Art, I'll be thinking of you and including you in my thoughts in the coming weeks. I hope you can clear whatever is troubling you. 2 a.m. Yeah, goodness gracious, that's hard. Uh, okay, some theoretical considerations. So, Deborah, obviously you can't participate, but you can always see the uh, the video later if you don't mind not participating. And so I'm glad to hear it's okay, though. Okay, some theoretical considerations. The Red Book begins with the chapter, The Way of What Is to Come. Its first words are quotations taken from the Bible. Isaiah 53, 1 through 4, and 9, 6, and John 1 through 14. And again, Isaiah 53, 1 through 4. And then Jung writes, if I speak in the spirit of this time, I must say no one and nothing can justify what I must proclaim to you. A few lines further, he writes, that is the God yet to come. The first lines written by Jung in the Red Book reveal that somehow he knew that the experiences to be presented pointed to the future and had a religious character, and that what he would proclaim was not in accordance with the spirit of his time. The confrontation between the spirit of this time and the spirit of the depths clearly reveals two distinct dimensions, complementary but distinct. On one hand, the spirit of this time pointed to conventions, traditions, precepts, rules, and norms recommended by society and which should be followed in order to adapt to the collective. On the other, the spirit of the depths leads to the search for originality, innovation, spontaneity, transgression, and is driven by the search for profound identity, the meaning and greater purpose of life, of the soul, and of his intimate nature. The former is more formal, rational, and logical. The latter, on the contrary, offers the logic of the heart, images, and metaphors. Jung experienced deeply the conflict between the spirit of this time, of his time, and the spirit of the depths. And this was the challenge of his life, to integrate these opposites. Jung himself states the importance of the experiences lived during that period when he wrote, quote, the years of which I have spoken to you, when I pursued the inner images, were the most important time of my life. Everything else is to be derived from this. It began at that time, and the later details hardly matter anymore. My entire life consisted in elaborating what have burst forth from the unconscious and flooded me like an enigmatic stream and threatened to break me. That was the stuff and material for more than only one life. Everything later was merely the outer classification, the scientific elaboration, and the integration into life. But the numinous beginning, which contained everything, was then. In order to investigate theoretically Jung's process and his relations to the spirit of that time and to the spirit of the depths, it is fundamental to consider some concepts of Jungian symbolic psychology created by the Brazilian Jungian analyst Carlos Byington, which I have outlined below. Developing Eric Neumann's writings, Carlos Byington describes four archetypal patterns of consciousness that constitute the archetypal region quaternion, archetypal region quaternion. They are as follows. The matriarchal archetype differs from Neumann's famous conception in that Byington considers the matriarchal archetype to be the archetype of sensuality, spontaneity, ludic spirit, desire, and pleasure. This archetype belongs not only to women, but also to men and to cultures. When it predominates, the relation between polarities occurs in the insular position, that is, in islands, which means that the experience in one pole can quickly move to the opposite pole. A common example is the child who easily goes from crying to laughing. The matriarchal archetype is not exclusive to children, and like all the others, accompanies us throughout our lives, although it may or may not be dominant. Many of the societies Jung called primitive are societies where matriarchal consciousness prevails with their magical mythic thinking and animistic religion. Let's try and see if the focus will readjust on my camera, because it appears that you're having problems with that. I hope not. Okay. Okay. The patriarchal archetype is the archetype of order, organization, law, rules, and planning. It stimulates a hierarchy among the polarities, thus establishing a strong antagonism between them. Consequently, the patriarchal archetype operates in the polarized position, clearly and rigidly establishing, for example, the polarities of good and evil, right and wrong, friend and enemy, boss, employee, etc. The patriarchal archetype is present in women, men, and in cultures and expresses itself, for example, in the pyramid system of an organization, in the computer binary system, as well as in relationships, institutions, or societies that behave predominantly in a hierarchical way. These two patterns of consciousness are well illustrated in the dialogue between Jung and the Red One, where Jung says, "You are Latin, you are Latin enough," hearing as an answer, "You are too German." The Latin culture, extroverted, exuberant, and open to demonstrations of affection, i.e., more matriarchal, is in this sense very different from the more patriarchal Swiss German tradition, in which emotions remain more hidden and people more serious. The alterity, alterity archetype is the archetype that promotes a dialectical relation between polarities, including and above all, between the matriarchal and patriarchal archetypes. In this pattern of consciousness, the matriarchal and patriarchal archetypes are considered to be equally important, which allows, for example, a spontaneous but responsible attitude, organized but pleasant. It is the archetype that grounds the paradoxes and enables one to recognize that something that is good in one situation may not be in another. The alterity archetype enables us to put ourselves in the other's place, and as such is the root of compassion, consideration for others, solidarity, and democracy. Similar to the other archetypal pattern of consciousness, it is present in men, women, and cultures. And then the totality archetype prevails when one works through a situation or an experience. It operates in the contemplative position, enabling an individual to consider the situation as a whole. The totality archetype is present when we try to close a gestalt or when we reflect on our day, a job, and even on our lives as a whole, when we realize that the time ahead for us is less than the time we have already lived. Okay. Um, Obviously, that's very important time, and uh, as Colonel Nicholson in Bridge over the River Kwai comments on the fact that he realizes he has less time to live than he had before, and he actually dies within the movie. So he was right. Let's see. And Richard says, my archetypes behave as though they are oblivious to the human realm. And this is very true. Um, Richard, I think all archetypes are oblivious. They're simply patterns that we sometimes start to live down. And so Dr. Guerra here is talking about only four, but there are so many tangential archetypes that they're, it's uh, every life is different. Um, and Cherie says, does one know the first printed book in America? My librarian, who is well read, did not. He had to Google it. Did you know every time we Google something, it's a cup of clean water? Well, maybe. Um, I, I guess you're talking about the data centers that are consuming clean water, I suppose. Uh, and Deborah says polarities are reflected in solar and lunar eclipses. Um, One is coming on the 17th of February. The sun is animus, moon is anima. Kathy, I cut way back to on Googling recently when I found that out. And Kathy says it's all AI now. Well, it is. A lot of things are changing to AI, and I have to admit it's become a convenient tool in my work. Um, So, with these tools provided by Jungian symbolic psychology, we can conclude that the spirit reigning in Jung's time was dominantly patriarchal. Born in Switzerland in the first quarter of the 19th, in the final quarter of the 19th century, and to a family where religious austerity played a prominent role. His father was a pastor and married to Emma, the heiress of a great fortune. Jung lived within a rigid socio-cultural context. Regarding the institution of marriage, Jung's time was also one of patriarchal dominance, expressed in men's authority over women in practically every area of life. Women's lives were focused on children and home. Traditionally, men were the head of the family, implemented the rules and law, and were considered the higher authority to whom wives and children had to submit. Marriages with men's and women's roles well defined were indissoluble, together with the common institutionalizing of lovers, men, obviously. Whenever the patriarchal archetype is dominant, the established rules must be followed, irrespective of what they mean to the individual and his or her individuation process. The dominating and repressive tendency characteristic of the patriarchal archetype frequently overshadows the matriarchal archetype, which is then repressed, disqualified, and subdued. By its nature, the patriarchal archetype privilege uh, hierarchy between polarities and can even try to eliminate one of the poles. Thus, it is the archetype more prone to form the shadow, since the repressed or excluded pole moves to the shadow and tends to appear in an inadequate way. The presence of the patriarchal archetype together with the patriarchal archetype is necessary for the alterity archetype to be expressed. This archetype enables us to reach a synthesis between thesis and antithesis. Yeah, thus it is the basis of the individuation process, which searches for meaning and self-realization and occurs when the polarities begin to integrate. That is, when polarities are considered equally important and can relate dialectically. From the Jungian symbolic psychology perspective, the conflict lived by Jung between the spirits of his time and the spirits of the depths is understood to be a conflict between the dominance of the patriarchal archetype and an attempt to live his life as an expression of the alterity archetype, which includes the ability to cope with the matriarchal archetype without repressing it. Um, in this way, Jung teaches us that the greatest challenge of our time is to base our lives on the alterity archetype in the balance between the matriarchal and patriarchal archetypes. Okay, comments. Let's see. So Deborah says, I've got doctor's appointments, but the weird thing is I'm curing myself of things before I get there. Google search is three something of power, and now we have people using AI when is three OWN per search. Okay, we don't know what that means, Mr. Coleman. My intuition is really honing in somehow, uh, like an instinctively, like I am instinctively eating the right herb or spice. That's from Deborah. And Kathy says, "Oh, I see. Get thee behind me, Satan. God is my protector." Um, okay. And Coleman says, watt hour. Okay. So 0.3 watt hours of power is used in a Google search for whatever that's worth. And so I think that what's interesting to me, because Jung is definitely an intuitive type, Deborah says, my intuition is really honing in somehow, like an instinctive, I'm instinctively eating the right herb or spice. And I do think that knowing about these things does help us start to bring the polarities of our psyche together. Now, that opens a question. Do we want the polarities of our psyche to find the middle ground? The reason is that um, the dualities are um, the source of psychic energy. And so, in the war between men and women, um, we have to say "Viva la différence," because the difference between men and women is such that their psychic energy is passed one way or another throughout life. And so we have to think about that, but we also have to think if we are one-sided. And obviously, in the United States right now, we have an administration that is trying to push a one-sided view, and it's quite obvious that um, that that's not going to prevail in the long term. Um, I guess I'm going to go on, but the issue is that there are many polarities, not just the four that she's mentioning here, and they operate simultaneously. So you can find polarities in color, for example, white and black, red and blue, um, green or yellow and purple, um, and blue and yellow becomes green, that sort of thing. And so, though each one of those has its own archetype, they're all out here. They're not, they're all everywhere. And so all I have to do is mention those polarities, and you immediately know, oh, yes, I know that polarity, and I know that polarity. And And so they're there all the time. Those archetypes are there all the time. And we need to live our lives in such a way that we can um, sail through those polarities. It's like sailing a boat. You know, you sail in one direction for a while, and then you sail in another direction, and um, you can't sail directly into one. And if, on the other hand, if you go all green, then you can sail away from the wind, but ultimately you have to stop and start using some different color. Um, and I'm going to excuse myself for a moment and have a bio break. I'll be right back. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, let me give an example from my current painting as a way of discussing these different archetypes. Um, and so I'm going to, whoops, I thought I had it up, but I guess I don't. Just a moment. Okay, now I do. Let me try that again. Okay, now I'm gonna do a share screen again because I want to talk about how these things come up. So, you know, what I've learned is that my painting is me interacting with my unconscious. My unconscious tells me what to paint at any given moment, and I follow what my unconscious says. And so, what I presume is that it doesn't want me to always paint yellow or always paint green. It wants diversity, and so I don't paint only yellow or only green, but I have to paint a color until that color is finished. So, for example, in this painting, um, my unconscious told me to paint green now. And so I started painting green yesterday, and I spent 4.5 hours painting green yesterday, and I spent another hour and a half this morning. And this is what I get. It took 6 hours of painting time to paint only the green that appears in the upper left. That's the color. There is another color of green on the painting, which I did on another occasion. So you can see this color right here is the green I've been working with, but I also painted with this color of green in on other occasions. And but if you painted everything the same color all over, you could paint, all 18 by 24 inches in it, in the yellow or in the green, let's say, but you wouldn't have a very interesting painting. Then you'd have a picture of yellow or a picture of green, which you can get with a thumbnail. You don't need the whole canvas of 300 square inches, 301 square inches, whatever it is. And so I am simply letting my unconscious tell me where to put certain colors, or where to put which color to use and where to put it, with the general exception that I paint in yellow in the upper right, green in the upper left, purple in the lower right, and uh, a a hot color like red or orange in the lower left. And that's based on the map of the psyche, which I've been taught by both Murray Stein and Colleen Kibert. Um, and the left side represents the past, and the right side represents the future. And I still don't know where this is going, other than I have provisionally named this painting Seventh Heaven. Um, but in any case, the point is that you can't have all one color. And I have a very large palette. I have one collection um, of watercolor paints that's over 200 colors. And although I suspect that some of them are very much the same. But in any case, it's a lot of colors. And what I usually try to do is use all the colors in the painting if I can. And Richard says, that's exquisite, Skip. I love the pastel mineral paints. Yeah, these are actually metallic paints that I'm using, especially the yellow and the green here. Um, or this new green, the green that's here, or in the upper corner. Um, and, I'm just letting my unconscious uh, tell me where to paint. And then as I'm painting, many different things come to my mind. And there are things that if you asked me last night what I'd be thinking about today, they wouldn't be those. And so I'm letting my unconscious converse with me about what's on my unconscious mind. And that's, it seems to me it's very useful. And, I argue that with regard to these pieces, if let me show you a completed one that's a recent completion. Um, they seem to tell me um, what. they seem to tell me a lot of things uh, about anything that I want to focus my mind on. So let me show you this one, which is the most recent one that I completed. And I'm just doing this for my grandchildren. I'm not selling these. They seem to like them. So anyway, this one is called Paradise East. And I was going to do Paradise West, but then when the seven appeared in my current painting, I decided it must mean seventh heaven. But this is Paradise East, and um, there's a lot of stuff in here, a lot of things. And it occurs to me that if somebody has um, writer's block, let's say, or some block in their creativity, regardless of where it is. If you just look at this painting, you can find what will move you on. And so, for example, I believe if you look at this painting, you can start writing about it and writing about the people that live in this place. If you think of it as a map, you can start thinking about people who live in one area of paradise or another area of paradise. And then you can, from there, sort of describe their situation and so on. And it would be very easy to write one or 100 novels based on this image. It would be very simple to do. Um, and at one point when I was looking at it in this way, um, I realized that I had painted King Kong on the right side here, right in the center. So here's his head and his green eyes and his body down here. And he's holding on to something that looks sort of semi-mechanical, or maybe that's multiple people in profile. I don't know. But anyway, if you were to start writing about this and you started from King Kong doing something, uh, you could find all kinds of things to write about it. And so it can be a stimulant to your own creativity, just to look at these paintings. And and you don't have to see that as King Kong. You could see it as something else. There are many things to see there. Um, but I'm I'm trying to make the point also that uh, I'm letting my unconscious tell me where to paint and what to paint. And so this painting is much richer for me than it would be for any other individual. Um, and uh, and I'm not sorry about that because the painting was for me and my grandchildren, and so I'm doing it as a process for me to communicate with my own unconscious, and you know someday 100 years from now, these paintings might be worth a bomb, but for me, they're only a communication with my grandchildren at the moment, and that's what I intend. Um, and and so Deborah asked, "What's the scale of this painting?" It's 18 by 24 is the in inches. Yeah. Yeah, sure. I could call, I could do a painting in the future called Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. I think Seventh Heaven is as far as I've gone so far. And so anyway, we'll see how that develops. But as it takes a long time to do these paintings, and you have to be patient enough to sit there and let your unconscious tell you what to do and how to do it. And everybody paints based on their mark. Um, and so anyway, let us go on. The next section is entitled Jung's Process. Deborah says it would be interesting to project it on the wall on a large scale. And actually, I have taken a small painting and had my printer blow it up. And that does work because the printer uses a very high quality camera when he photographs it before he prints it, so he can blow it up to any scale one would want. I mean, you could make it into wallpaper if you wanted without too much trouble. um, right. Okay, Jung's process. As a man of his time, Jung tried to resist the spirit of the depths and remain within the values of his era without realizing that this would be useless. Quote, I resisted recognizing that the everyday belongs to the image of the Godhead. I fled this thought. I hid myself behind the highest and coldest star. Uh, but the spirit of the depths caught up with me and forced the bitter drink between my lips. Unquote. In my book, The Love Drama of C.G. Jung, this is Dr. Guerra's book. I tried to demonstrate that the loving relationship between Jung and Tony Wolfe played a central role in the conflictive, painful, and redemptive experiences that he presents in the Red Book. Because it, excuse me, because it is not the purpose of this text uh, and since this book is available, I will not focus on this issue here. However, I believe it is important to highlight that when we read Jung's reflections on love in the Red Book, in Memory Streams Reflections, and in his interview with Michael Serrano, as well as other sources, and when we accompany Jung's interpretation in the Red Book of his typological enantiodromium, which flows in the direction of the feeling function. And when we understand like Lance Owens, that the four last great works of Jung, the psychology of the transference, Ion, Answer to Job, and Mysterium Conjunctionis, were the deepening of his experience from the Red Book, the importance of love in his life and individuation process becomes undeniable. That is why we wonder how it must have been for a man with his loving and creative exuberance to deal with the spirit of his time, which, through identifying man with the patriarchal archetype, associates him with logos and distances him from eros. If the spirit of his time stimulated Jung to keep within social expectations and the collective patterns of adaptation, then opening to love meant delivering himself to the spirit of the depths, which led to the truth of the soil through unique experiences that were deep and transgressive, since he was pushed to surpass conventional norms and to establish what Neumann would later call the ethics of individuation. Now, one thing I wanted to emphasize here further in my paintings, uh, just a moment while I bring it back. Um, Not that one. Um, Remind me. Okay, I bring back up Seventh Heaven, which I'm working on right now. Again, this is a process. And so I'm using the feminine side in the doodle. This is what Colleen Kibert taught me, to do something totally randomly. Um, I I simply, at the beginning of this painting, I simply threw tea bags at the paper. And then it occurred to me that I should make my tea cup um, wet and then put impressions of my teacup on the page. So I did that. And then what I did was I drew lines through all the color boundaries. So that's what you're seeing in this sort of half-done painting here, is wherever I haven't put color yet, I've created a cell that's going to receive color at some point. But at the time that I threw the tea bags at it, it was a totally random act. I wasn't trying to bring any patriarchy into it. I was just throwing tea bags at it, or in partially in putting down my cup, so that I created these circles that also was random. So you see that the circles aren't uniformly separated or anything like that. Um, Now, that represents the extent of the feminine side in my work, other than it's feminine for me to listen to my unconscious in terms of what it tells me about where to put a given color at a given time. And so that process happens in every space when I'm listening to my unconscious. But I'm also creating structure. And when I'm creating structure, um, that's my masculine side talking. So, in terms of when I draw all these lines on the color boundaries, I'm doing that in a very masculine kind of way, in a very structured kind of way, namely that I want to separate the colors, and I'm going to make sure that I draw those specific lines. So those specific lines are logos taking over. So Logos drew all the lines onto the painting. And once I finish putting the color on, I will once again draw lines on all the color boundaries because they they're there and then they tend to be obscured by adding the colors, and then I put them back in. And that is a very logos oriented process. So when I'm coloring, um, I'm listening to my unconscious about where to put the color. But then if I'm drawing the lines on, that's logos operating, and I'm trying to make something out of something that was not. And if I were to paint 1,000 more pictures, I would never paint the same picture, even if I wanted to. I wouldn't be able to. And so these paintings are totally unique in that respect. Um, and I'm sure you understand that, but I wanted to emphasize that there's a give and take between my feminine and masculine sides, where you could say my feminine side, my side that communicates with my intuition better, is deciding what colors to use and where to use them for the most part. As I said, there were some rules provided by Murray Stein and Colleen Kibert, which expedited my process. But then when I'm coloring, that's a feminine process where I'm just being receptive and putting down color. But then when I draw the lines, it's a very masculine process. It's more like architecture. Um, so Cherie says their temple, talking about the Druids, their temples were circles of stones at the top. Fire was worshipped, and human beings, especially prisoners and criminals, were often sacrificed. Yes. Yeah, we're glad we've gotten past that to a certain degree, at least. Of course, I do think that we're sacrificing our young men and women when we send them into war. And so human sacrifice is not gone. We have 58,200 plus young people who were sacrificed to the Vietnam War before we wised up and said we shouldn't be doing this. Um, and so the feminine side, the side that says, "No, I don't want to go to war," um, they created the um, the anti-war movement of the 1960s. Uh, and people like me bought into the patriarchy. And so I enlisted in the Marines and went and did my duty in Vietnam. And that was a very patriarchal thing to do. But in retrospect, after 50 years of thinking about it, I know that the Vietnam War uh, people were, the Vietnam War antagonists were right. They were right. And I had occasion to go to see the monks um, this week. And that created an interesting thing because this is what AI did for me. So, first of all, I saw the leader monk, who's Bhikkhu Hanakara, who led the peace march from Fort Worth um, to Annapolis. Uh, and here the monks are. This statue is Thurgood Marshall, and this is in front of the Maryland Capitol building. So you can see them there. And that's a painting of, but then somebody did an AI and it took my photograph and with AI made me a monk, which was kind of funny, but it's the other side of logic is humor um, very often. So I thought you'd like to see that briefly anyway. uh, but it was a very good day to be out and seeing them in Annapolis. Um, so Artist in Life is saying that they've only uh, just heard of the word druid. I can't explain that since druids are often mentioned. Okay, so here we go with Jung's process. However, I believe it's important to highlight that when we read Jung's reflections on love in the Red Book, in Memories, or in his interview with Michael Serraro, as well as other sources, and when we accompany Jung's interpretation in the Red Book of his typological enantiodromia, which flows in the direction of the feeling function, and when we understand, like Lance Owens, that the four last great works of Jung uh, were the deepening of his experiences from the Red Book, the importance of love in his life and individuation process becomes undeniable. That is why we wonder how it must have been for a man with his loving and creative exuberance to deal with the spirit of his time, which, through identifying man with the patriarchal archetype, associates him with logos and distances him from eros. Okay, I read that part before, but I felt it was useful. If the spirit of this time stimulated Jung to keep within social expectations and the collective patterns of adaptation, then opening to love meant delivering himself to the spirit of the depths, which led to the truth of the soul through unique experiences that were deep and transgressive, since he was pushed to surpass conventional norms and to establish with Neumann that what Neumann would later call the ethics of the individuation. And so, let me just comment that, as you probably know, Carl Jung lived in a menage a trois for 40 years with his wife and um, Tony Wolfe, who um, didn't live with them, but was accepted by Emma Jung. And this is a conservative Swiss German household, of course. And there obviously is speculation about what happened because after the war, Jung had a red Mercedes. So you can think about what that might have meant. And he would park it in right in Tony Wolf's driveway every Wednesday afternoon. And so no one knows what transpired between the two of them during those seances, but um, Tony Wolf served as his analyst, I guess, and uh, we won't speculate on what else may have transpired. So, and And so Richard says synchronicity abounds here between us all. Yes, indeed. Uh, and Cherie says she found a book last week by Anna Freud called The Dream of Psychoanalysis. She was Freud's daughter. Yeah. I, that's one I haven't gotten to, but who knows? Life is long and I might get to it. Okay. In the process of transforming consciousness based dominantly on the patriarchal archetype toward that where the alterity archetype prevails, Jung shows a way, opening oneself to the matriarchal archetype, welcoming its imagination and letting its contents flow. And Jung goes beyond this. He recognizes the holy dimension that accompanies the profound expressions of the soul and even asks, "Are you God?" Um, Jung witnessed the beginning of the great cultural transformation resulting from the diminishing repression of the matriarchal archetype, which was expressed initially through the sexual liberation and the hippie movement. Jung died in 1961. These happened in the 1960s after his death. This cultural step, which began with the discovery of contraceptive pills and the studies undertaken by Masters and Johnson and Sher Haidt, opened the path to women's liberation. Women began to express their intellectual and productive strength, their creativity and autonomy in the most diverse fields of society, and this movement enabled them to accept and acknowledge their sexuality as legitimate. And I can say with assurance that my friend Colleen Kibert, who is now in her 93rd year, I believe, was one of the early uh, movers of these movements in California. Um, and so she is a national treasure to me. Um, and so Richard says any religion that needs a human sacrifice is to be learned of but not practiced. Christ is God incarnate, and he came to us and allowed us to kill him, thereby being the ultimate human sacrifice, uh, where we killed our creator as the last human sacrifice ever. Well, actually, my colleague Rabbi Stephen Fuchs will dispute that, and he will argue that Abraham's not sacrificing Isaac was the end of human sacrifice. So, obviously there you can see sacrifice in the animal world, and human animals until about 3,000 years ago anyway were sacrificing one another. And we still do it. We just call it by different names. Now we call it warfare. And but who can deny that the 58,200 plus individuals on the Vietnam War are anything but human sacrifices to the idiocy of warfare. Okay. So Jung fought against being subdued by the spirit of his time and to be freed from the shadow of the matriarchal archetype. The exuberant presence of this archetype in Jung's personality, expressed in his passionate nature, in his interest in social gatherings, organizing parties, dinners, and games at the psychology club, his love of sailing, and his aesthetic pleasure, is also evident in the Red Book. There he let his imagination flow and allowed himself to drift in the creative and illogic torrent of the unconscious, and is also evident that he sought refuge in playing, to which he retreated in this period of turbulent emotions. In his search to integrate the matriarchal and patriarchal archetypes, Jung reveals his calling to live the alterity archetype. And it was the presence of this archetype that marked his personal and professional experience, and which significantly impacted his work. Despite the existence today of certain retrograde movements that reveal the shadow of the patriarchal archetype through authoritarianism, abuse of power, lack of consideration of minorities, and even of nature, and also the collective presences of the shadow of the alterity archetype expressed by demagogy, lies, corruption, and even the attempts to undermine democracy. It is the latter archetype that encourages the individuation process, since it is this archetype that permits the integration of polarities. Jung's process, as revealed in the Red Book, is thus of extreme importance, since it offers us a model for achieving the alterity consciousness, and illustrates, among other aspects, his capacity to bear extreme tension and endure and recognize consciously his shadow, for only in this way can it be transformed. Jung, hanging from the branches of the divine tree for the 3 days and indulged, and 3 nights, a metaphor for the situation of conflict from which we sorry, I'm hypnotizing myself, as you probably know if you have experience with me. So it's uh, putting myself to sleep. Sorry, I have to take a break here. Okay. 3 days and 3 nights, a metaphor for the situation of conflict from which we cannot escape without mutilating part of our personality. It is a good example of this. Jung's suffering demonstrates that his transgression of the existing morals, within which individuation would not be possible, wasn't inconsequential, but part of a deep process of elaboration. To live through a conflict of such dimensions and to endure the consequences contributes to strengthening and developing one's personality. Jung not only lived this, but also developed from personal experiences a consistent and profound theoretical framework. The transcendent function, well, let me stop before I go on with this. Um, let me just say, um, that Jung did lead a transgressive life, a life of um, living basically with two women who were, if not voluntarily, but were persuaded to integrate with one another in certain ways. Tony Wolfe showed up at Jung's house every Sunday for Sunday dinner. Uh, and Jung was going out of the house every Wednesday afternoon to visit Tony Wolfe. Um, that arrangement would tear most families apart. And to me, it's unfortunate that um, whatever it is, the patriarchy has persuaded women that if a man strays one time or even multiple times, that should be the end of a marriage. That's why we have 50% divorce rate in this country. And and so we have to grow up to a different level where um, some things are not the end of the world. I mean, if the family can deal with it, um, and as Jung did, and by his own living experience, um, then it can be okay. It can work. And so the patriarchy created rules um, because it was found even back to the time of Moses and the Ten Commandments that uh, marriage is one man and one woman. But because they obviously found that there were other societal ills that were created if that wasn't the case. And that's why that patriarchal rule was created. And yet, life can be done any number of ways, as we now know from um, bisexual marriage or monosexual marriage, and also by gender alteration or gender dysphoria, as they're now calling it. Um, you know, all those things can be lived with if we tolerate them. And obviously, the patriarchy is trying very hard to stop them, but it will not succeed. And, as we already know. And so it's better to um, get gain some tolerance and stop fooling around, which is what we've kind of been doing for a while here. um, and and so I don't know. I don't want to really get into the political aspects of it, but obviously the patriarchy controls us by saying, "Oh, you're breaking the rules," and that obviously controls us in many ways. And so we have to think about um, where we ought to allow a certain amount of creativity in human relationships, I would say. Uh, and yeah, um, so Richard, I wish that we wouldn't take such intransigent positions as Judaism is a totally different religion than Christianity is incomplete. I don't think that that's necessarily a fair judgment. And Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all are Abrahamic religions in the sense that they all descended from Abraham. And indeed, um, Ishmael, who was the eldest son of Abraham, actually, he was the son of Sarah's slave, um, and his mother traveled to Saudi Arabia, and the Hajj that we see today, 2,500 years later, is a reenactment of their experience of finding God and finding a well based on their belief. Um, and and so if you look at the Kaaba, which is this big black cubical monolith in Mecca, uh, what's in that is a well, and it's in in a place like Saudi Arabia, water is extremely valuable, and that well has been producing water since um, Ishmael and his mother discovered it at the time of Abraham. And so, without understanding um, how other religions have developed, I think we shouldn't necessarily say that they're totally different from Christianity when they aren't. And and we have to understand that there's certain things that um, while Christians believe them as an article of faith, for example, one wife, the fact that there are multiple wives in Islam was a very cultural need at the time because um, there was a lot of warfare that was going on in the Arabian Peninsula over the last several thousand years, mainly warfare over water, and um, and so many young men were killed, many fathers were killed, and so in Islam, the fact that you can have many wives, oh, by the way, they all have to be treated equally, supposedly, okay? And that was where men who had money could uh, take a widow under their wing, and that was Muslim form um, of charity, of welfare. over many centuries. And so the fact that that's still in the system and that multiple wives is allowed in Islam is not such a damnable thing. It was a common sense thing in that culture, um, and I don't think it's an easy life. It so happens that I did a lot of traveling in Saudi Arabia over the last 25 years. And since 2002, I've traveled to Saudi Arabia 23 times. And I knew only one man and one woman, two separate families who had multiple spouses or were involved in a multiple spouse marriage. And in the case of the man, um, from what I could see, it was hell on earth because he was trying to juggle two wives. And in his case, he had not told one of the wives that there were two wives. One of the wives knew it and one of them didn't. And so he was constantly juggling these two wives on his cell phone while also trying to do business. So that seemed like hell on earth to me. and and maybe common sense would gradually rule that out. Meanwhile, the other one was a woman who was married to a very influential man. I won't say who, uh, but she liked it because it meant that uh, he spent um, 3 days a week with the other wife. And so she was free on those 3 days, and he spent 3 days a week with each wife, and he spent the Sabbath separated from his wife. So, um, there are pluses and minuses of these things, and I think we should not be so judgmental about one another's religions unless we have lived them and experienced them fully. Um, and and so a lot of things are cultural. Um, so let's see. Let's see. And Richard says there are Messianic Jews. Well, sure, there are Messianic all kinds of people. And now it seems to me, and as you'll know on this YouTube channel, my perception is instead of being like this, where we're always opposite one another with our backs turned, we ought to start facing one another and finding ways to live together. And that's ultimately what we're going to be forced to do as a species. Um, and so, everybody should follow the religion or lack thereof that is their way of uh, achieving the experience of the divine. And we should leave one another alone on that aspect. Um, that's my perception or belief. Um, And Richard takes the position love can't be divided by three, but lust and pride can be divided into infinity. Well, okay. I, you know, that's a that's a position, Richard. I'm not going to argue the point with you. Um, and Shri comments here upon generational traumatization. And obviously, we have a lot of trauma in our ways of living. Obviously, a divorce is traumatic for the whole family in very serious ways. And so, if we can find ways to live together and stay together, I'm all for it. I never expected in my lifetime to be involved in a divorce, and yet I was, and um, I don't have to go into the reasons that I was involved in a divorce, but um, we just have to understand that we all have to live. We all have to live, and we can't be forced to live unhappily. Uh, Kathy says the whole point is individuational. There's a whole lot of shoulding going on. Yeah, when we think that people, when we're when we have the instinct to say to somebody, you should live this way, I think that's when we run amok. And, each person has to find their own way in life. And I think that we should avoid shoulding if we can. And I don't know, can't pronounce the name there, but Guerra too, there says, thanks for your comments on learning to live together and know more about each other's worlds. Absolutely, we have to do that. And Sherry says, prodigy is at its essence adaptability and persistent positive obsession. Um, okay, I'm not, that's a pretty broad statement, so I'm not going to get into it per se. Prodigy can be defined many ways. Uh, and Papian Maximo says, ultimately, it's important to have mysticism in a society that is governed by so much literal language. Mysticism lowers my anxiety as someone in science, tech. Um, and to Kathy Kerr, he says circumambulation is about moving around, right? Yes, it's about circumambulation is about moving around the center, which is the essence of Jungian psychology. So sometimes we may be more masculine and sometimes we may be more feminine. Obviously, as I create a YouTube channel here uh, in which all are welcome, or pretty much all except for people that want to disrupt us, um, that is very feminine activity to do. And much of Jung's writing is also very feminine in that way. And Sherry says, so Kathy says, I'm especially not taking advice from sources rife with misogyny, human and animal sacrifice, incest. Yeah, fair enough. And, I think that over time, we'll we'll find those are, I mean, they're already on the outs, I would say, and they'll just become more so. And Sherry says, without persistence, what remains is an enthusiasm of the moment. Without adaptability, what may be channeled into destructive fanaticism. Without position obsession, there is nothing at all. Um, so Kathy says, as a Pilates instructor, I can appreciate that center is a constantly moving target, and we are all somewhere in the continuum. Absolutely. Um, and Maxwell says, right, it's about not being stuck. I feel like a lot of anxiety comes from feeling stuck in an aspect of my personality that doesn't fit my situation and my goals. And I concur. Um, and Kathy says, i.e., the Bible. Yeah, the Bible has stuck lots of societies for a very long time. And I'm currently studying the Bible for the wisdom that it contains, but I don't think it's excuse me, I don't think it's the end. I think it's the beginning. And and we should um, respect it as such. I accept it as totally true, uh, and also, but it was largely written by um, early Iron Age men, and so it seems to me that the way we look at things um, has changed quite a bit since a lot of it was written, and we need to recognize that. Um, Kathy says, when people tell you who they are, believe them. Yeah, Maxima says, when it comes to the Bible, I like to imagine the brutality of the ancient world, the old world. I like to imagine that it is where that if it were written now, it would be written differently, but preserve its essence. Yeah, probably so. Um, and, Sherry says, I found Butler at 12 years old. I don't know what Butler is referring to there. Uh, but in any case, we've evolved some. I am going to be doing a series of readings of the Bible that either encourages or criticizes some aspects. And And I'm doing that with one of my colleagues who is a Black woman, quite outspoken Black woman, who talks about how patriarchy kept women down. And I said, well, yeah, because I bet you don't even know about Proverbs 8, and which was a position, presumably of Solomon. The Proverbs came from Solomon, presumably, based on what I've studied so far. And Proverbs 8 points to wisdom as being feminine. and and I, and as I reflect on it, I have to agree. And things haven't changed at all in that respect since the time of Solomon. And he was able to pull it all together and say that, which is to his credit. And so we'll be commenting on that as the first round out of the box that we're going to do toward the end of this month. We're not, uh, my colleague is not available until then due to some surgery she's having, but um, I'm presuming that she will be fine and will be able to participate with me. Okay, and Kathy suggests I ask about Octavia Butler, which I certainly will do. Um, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up um, here for today because she's got a long way to go here. And so I am on page 73 of volume 4 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, which is a collection of essays from Jungian analysts. And some of them really put excellent work into it. And obviously it's captured our attention for uh, many years. Is this the 15th? I guess it is, right? Yeah, 15th. Um, and so I will start from that point next week. And so if anybody has any last thoughts for me, please put them in the chat. And I will otherwise, I'll try to get the Zoom meet thing going correctly. Thank you, Deborah, for being kind enough to point out how it was not malfunctioning, um, so that I can correct it. Um, and Cherie asks, who was Garrett Morgan, since it is Black History Month? And I don't know who was Garrett Morgan. That would be a good one for me to take into school because we're recognizing Black History Month this this year. Yeah, and Kathy comments on the Bible, we've accepted it as the norm. It's still alive and well. I would say it's both alive and well and alive and ill. And we need to find we need to find the excuse me, we need to find the balance of what is right. And that changes over time. And so we need to do that. Okay, the Black Edison, thank you, Garrett Morgan. Uh, it's interesting that he has that name, Sheree, because um, my first ancestor in the New World was Wolfert Garrettson, Wolfert, son of Garrett, and one of the families of one of my daughters is the Morgans. So strange how these things work sometimes. Yeah, Richard says we need to evolve in merciful ways, and Trump is merciless. Trump is immature, I would say, and hasn't grown up yet. Uh, yeah, as Kathy says, right living by universal law. Okay, I'm sorry. My voice has finally given out here, so I'm going to have to move along. But thank you, everyone, and have a great week. I'll see you next week and enjoy it. Hopefully, you're enjoying a day off tomorrow for President.